My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I am 66 years old. I live alone in a cedar-framed house by the lake in Vermont, where the mornings are slow and the air smells faintly of pine and wood smoke. Tonight, however, I was not thinking about the quiet of the lake. I was thinking about tomorrow, my son's wedding day, and the gift I had prepared with trembling, careful hands. I had spent the afternoon smoothing a silk handkerchief I had embroidered myself, the initials stitched in navy thread, the kind of detail Daniel used to admire when he was a boy. I placed it beneath the cherry wood frame I had chosen, the same shade as the cradle my late husband once built. As I folded the last sheet of tissue paper, I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer, "Tomorrow is going to be beautiful." At the table, my granddaughter Lily sipped apple juice, her legs swinging above the floor. She watched me with that bright, guileless gaze only a 9-year-old can hold. When I said half to her and half to myself, "I can't wait for tomorrow," her little fingers twitched and the glass slipped from her hands. It shattered across the hardwood, the juice spreading like a stain. No cloth could soak fast enough. She gasped, and her lips trembled as she looked at me. "Grandma," she whispered, "I'm sorry, but the wedding was last week." For a moment, the world tipped. I laughed weakly, trying to push the words away. "No, sweetheart, it's tomorrow. I have the invitation right here." I pulled open the drawer and lifted the thick cream envelope, my name written in flourished ink. May 27th. Tomorrow. But Lily's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "Mom said not to tell you, but we already went." Daddy wore his blue tie. I wore my shiny shoes. My knees gave out before I realized I had lost balance, and I sank into the nearest chair, clutching the invitation until the paper wrinkled beneath my grip. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Something inside me cracked, not loud, not sharp, but like an old floorboard giving way under weight, too long ignored. The kitchen still smelled faintly of apple juice and glass cleaner when I finally pulled myself together. I couldn't let Lily see me falling apart, not yet. I sent her upstairs to play, then slipped the crumpled invitation into my purse and grabbed my keys. The evening sky had already turned lavender over the lake as I drove toward Margaret's house, the one place where truth had always felt steady. Margaret Crane had been my friend for nearly 40 years. She was the kind of woman who noticed details, the kind who never missed a misplaced comma or a forged signature. When she opened her door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She simply stepped aside and said, "Come in, Eleanor." I sat at her oak table, the envelope heavy in my hand, my pulse loud in my ears. Margaret put on a pot of tea and waited until the kettle began to hum before reaching across the table. I slid the invitation toward her, unable to speak. She unfolded it carefully, tracing the embossed letters with her finger, tilting it under the light like a jeweler might study a gem. "This is professional," she murmured, "thick stock embossed edges. But it doesn't mean it's the only version." She set the card down, her eyes steady on mine. "If the mailing list was split, you could have been sent one deliberately different." Her words landed harder than I expected. I gripped my mug, though the tea had gone cold. "So it wasn't a mistake," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Margaret didn't rush to answer. She just placed her hand gently over mine, firm and grounding. In that silence, the truth settled. My son hadn't forgotten me. He had erased me. I left Margaret's house with the invitation pressed against my chest, the paper no longer a promise, but a weapon. I drove home in a hollow hush, the kind that made the dashboard clock tick like a metronome on the wrong song. The house greeted me with its familiar creaks, and I left the porch light burning as though it could guide me back to sense. I laid the invitation on the kitchen table and stared at the black serif letters at my name curled across the paper, like a promise no one had ever meant to keep. In the stillness, other voices crowded in, my own younger, whispering yes to anything that might keep Daniel upright. When the mill let go of my husband's crew and the accident stole him before the severance could reach us, I learned how to stack realities. I put aside the graduate program I had dreamed about and took the night shift at Grocer's Pride, stacking shelves in a coat too thin for the freezer aisle. I trimmed roses for cash at the florist on Saturdays and read bedtime stories with smelling salts hidden in my pocket so I wouldn't nod off on the rug. Summer meant overtime. Winter meant extra socks. When Daniel needed braces, I sold my grandmother's ring and told myself straight teeth were a better heirloom. When he earned a small scholarship but still came up short for tuition, I tutored algebra at the library until my wrists ached from tracing the same equations softer and softer for children who weren't my own. And later, when a 2-bedroom house on Juniper Street finally came within reach, I set up a trust in our name so the bank would stop closing its doors on us. The day I pressed the key into Daniel's palm, he said thanks. I said you're welcome. And the rest disappeared into the wallpaper, like the smell of paint after it dries. Last Thanksgiving should have told me everything. I walked into Daniel and Vanessa's house carrying a pecan pie still warm from the oven, wrapped in a towel so the steam wouldn't escape. I had also tucked a small knitted shawl for Lily's doll into my purse, the sort of gift I thought might make her smile when the evening grew long. The house shimmered with candles and crystal. Vanessa's parents stood at the head of the table. Glasses raised their words about family legacy echoing against the vaulted ceiling. Guests laughed politely, forks chimed on china, and Daniel poured champagne like he had been rehearsing for an audience. I looked for my place among them, expecting to see a card with my name. Instead, I was guided toward a folding table near the playroom. The chair wobbled when I sat, and the child beside me promptly fell asleep with his cheek pressed into his plate. On my other side, a nanny checked her phone between bites. From across the room, Vanessa caught my eye, only once her smile tight, as if to say, "This is where you belong." Daniel didn't look my way at all. I sat quietly listening to the speeches, the toasts, the laughter rising like music I hadn't been invited to dance to. At the time, I told myself there were too many guests that someone had to sit apart. I convinced myself it meant nothing. But sitting there with a forkful of pie untouched, I felt a draft slip under the door colder than the November wind. Now with the false invitation crumpled in my purse, I knew that Thanksgiving wasn't an accident. It was a rehearsal. By the next evening, my patience had thinned to a thread. I drove to Daniel's house with the invitation in my coat pocket, the edges softening from the sweat of my palm. The porch light was bright, the same brass fixture I had helped install when they first moved in. I rang the bell, and it was Vanessa who answered, her smile more of a smirk than a welcome. "Eleanor," she said flatly, not even bothering with mother or mom. Her perfume drifted out before she did. I stepped inside without waiting. The foyer smelled of lemon polish and candles too clean to feel lived in. Daniel appeared from the hallway, shirt untucked, tie crooked, as if he had been interrupted mid-drink. His face colored when he saw me. "Mom," he muttered. I held out the invitation. "You sent me the wrong date." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "It wasn't meant to hurt you. It was just easier this way. Less stress than inviting your own mother." My voice didn't rise. It dropped low cold. Vanessa crossed her arms. "You always bring up old stories. You make people uncomfortable. Weddings are supposed to be joyful, not about debts." I turned to her calm as stone. 3 years of your mortgage. The hospital bills when Lily was born. Those debts paid for your joy. She scoffed. "No one asked you. You offered, and you always remind us after." Daniel looked at the stairs anywhere but me. That silence hurt more than her words. I straightened my hand, tightening on my purse strap. "You're right," I said softly. "That is how it worked." And I walked out, leaving their perfect foyer colder than when I entered. Back home, the house felt too quiet, like it was waiting for me to notice what I had ignored for years. I hung my coat, left my purse on the counter, and stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the darkened window. Their words still clung to me, sharp as glass. "You offered. You always remind us." I walked to the study and knelt by the old mahogany file cabinet, the one I hadn't opened in years. The lock still turned to the rhythm I remembered, left right center, and the drawer slid open with a sigh. Inside, tucked between tax returns and expired insurance forms, was a thick binder, wrapped in plastic. Across the front in my own handwriting it read, Hayes Family Trust. My fingers trembled as I laid it flat on the desk. Page after page, the signatures stared back at me. The ink crisp, the notary stamps clean. 7 years ago, when Daniel and Vanessa couldn't qualify for the full loan on their house, I had built this trust to keep the bank from shutting the door. I hadn't just co-signed. I had bought the land outright, structuring the trust, so I remained the majority owner. 75% my name printed clear. I sat back in the chair, heart steadying. They thought I had forgotten. They thought kindness erased contracts. But here, in black and white, was the foundation beneath their granite countertops and vaulted ceilings. For the first time since Lily dropped that glass, my breath came easy. I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. The next morning, the lake was wrapped in mist, the kind that makes everything look softer than it really is. I poured a cup of coffee, but the taste was flat bitter, like the night before, still sat on my tongue. I didn't linger. I placed the binder into my satchel, slipped on my coat, and drove into town. The county recorder's office was nearly empty, just the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the squeak of shoes on linoleum. A young clerk behind the counter glanced at the file in my hands, then back at me. "Trust documents?" he asked. "Yes," I said, sliding the binder across. My voice was, even though I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. "I'd like to make amendments." He flipped through the pages, then handed me a pen. The paper beneath my hand was cool, steady as I signed the notarized forms prepared by my attorney the night before. With each stroke, I revoked Daniel and Vanessa's access to the maintenance account, froze the credit cards tied to the property, and closed the sub-account for utilities. The clerk stamped each page with a sharp click, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the quiet office. When it was done, he gathered the documents neatly and said effective immediately. I thanked him, lifted the satchel back onto my shoulder, and walked out into the sunlight. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't text Vanessa. I let silence do the work. By the time I drove past the lake again, I realized I wasn't shaking anymore. I had begun. By evening, my phone lit up with messages I didn't bother to open. The first came from Vanessa, all capital letters demanding to know why the grocery card had declined. An hour later, another arrived, sharper, angrier. The mortgage payment bounced. "What did you do?" I placed the phone face down on the table and let it buzz until the battery drained. The next morning, Daniel's email arrived. The subject line was simple: mistake. His words tried to sound calm, but I could read the panic underneath. "Mom, something's wrong with the account. If this was intentional, please tell me. If not, we should call the bank." I closed the laptop without answering. While their lives began to unravel, I poured myself tea and searched their wedding hashtag online. Photos still filled the screen, Vanessa in her lace gown, Daniel raising a glass between her parents. The comments were full of admiration until one line caught my eye. Why wasn't Daniel's mother there? The question hung unanswered, but more followed. Friends whispered in threads, strangers speculated. Screenshots found their way to me through Margaret, who sent them with nothing but a raised brow in the text that followed. By the third day, Vanessa posted a photo of herself with her chin lifted high, writing, "Nothing hurts more than being sabotaged by someone who should love you." Her followers offered sympathy, but a few replies pierced through. Did you really forge an invitation? Their perfect image, the one they had built on curated reels and glossy posts, was beginning to crack, and I hadn't spoken a word. They came at dusk, their SUV crunching over the gravel drive like an unwelcome memory. I was folding linens on the porch when I saw them step out, both dressed too carefully for an unannounced visit. Vanessa wore sunglasses, though the light was already fading, her lips pressed into a thin line. Daniel followed, shoulders hunched, a man who had forgotten how to stand tall. "Mom," he began, his voice quick, nervous. "We've had a rough few weeks. Some rumors are spreading about the wedding. Clients are uneasy. And..." He glanced at Vanessa. She finished for him. "The bills. A few slipped through. Temporarily. We just need a little time. A place to get back on our feet." They spoke like applicants at a bank, rehearsed and brittle. I didn't move from my chair. Instead, I rose slowly, carried a tray from the kitchen, and set down 2 cups of Earl Grey. Steam curled into the cool air. They each took a cup, though neither drank. "You built a wedding without me?" I said quietly, "but I built the foundation you stand on." Daniel flinched, his eyes falling to the floorboards. Vanessa shifted, finally taking off her sunglasses, her expression tight. I reached beside the chair and lifted a thick envelope, its seal already stamped. I placed it in Daniel's hand. He stared at the bold letters on the front notice of termination. 30 days to vacate. Vanessa's breath caught. "You're evicting us." "No," I said calmly. "I'm reminding you whose name is on the deed." The steam from their cups faded into the evening air as silence closed in. The notice must have landed like stone in water, because within a week Daniel filed a formal challenge. A thick envelope arrived from his attorney claiming confusion, misunderstanding that the trust had never been meant to be so rigid. He argued I had only co-signed, that my intent had always been for him to inherit without restriction. But intent does not stand against ink. My attorney, a precise woman named Caroline, responded with scanned deeds, notarized amendments, and time-stamped transfers. Every clause bore my signature. Every seal shone clear. There was no room for interpretation, no space for wishful memory. When Caroline called me, her tone was crisp, almost clinical. "You built it properly, Eleanor. They don't have a foothold." I thanked her, then let the silence on my end say more than words could. I took the next step quietly. I went to the credit union, closed the joint expense account, and shifted every remaining dollar into a trust solely under my control. I updated my estate file, removing Daniel as my emergency contact. In his place, I wrote Margaret's name with steady hand. That night, the phone rang, but I let it go unanswered. Vanessa's voice filled the machine thin with desperation. "We can work this out. Please, Eleanor." I sat at the table, the binder open before me, and realized something I hadn't felt in years. Their voices no longer dictated my choices. The weight had shifted, and it was not mine to carry anymore. A week later, there was a knock at my door just after sunset. When I opened it, Lily stood there with a small overnight bag slung across her shoulder, her hair in 2 crooked braids. She looked up at me, cheeks flushed from the evening chill. "Daddy said I could stay here for the weekend," she said, almost shy. "Is that okay?" I bent down, my throat tightening as I smoothed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Of course it's okay," I whispered. She dropped the bag with a thud and wrapped her arms around my waist. I held her close, breathing in the scent of lavender shampoo and crayons, and for the first time in weeks the house felt warm. That night we baked cornbread together, her laughter ringing through the kitchen as flour dusted the counters. Later we took a walk along the lake, the moonlight catching in the ripples, while she told me stories about school, about a friend who made her laugh so hard milk came out her nose. Her voice light and unfiltered, filled spaces I hadn't realized were empty. When bedtime came, she settled into the amber guest room, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Before her eyes closed, she whispered, "I love this place. It feels safe." I stood in the doorway long after her breathing evened out the words echoing through me. Safe. Not because of walls or locks, but because in this house she was seen, heard, remembered. Some bonds I realized deserved preservation, even when others had to be broken. 1 year has passed since the night Lily whispered that my house felt safe. The seasons have turned, and with them my life has shifted into something steadier, quieter, and wholly mine. I rise each morning to the sound of lake wind moving through the birch trees instead of the hum of obligation. The house remains mine in every sense, legally, emotionally, spiritually. I repainted the guest room, a warm, amber-planted lavender by the mailbox, and bought a new kettle that whistles sharp and cheerful. On Thursdays, I teach a small memoir writing class at the community center. 7 women, 1 widower, all of us carrying stories too heavy to leave untold. On Sundays, I brunch with Margaret and a circle of women who laugh more than they eat our conversations, spinning around books, recipes, the satisfaction of tomatoes, ripening on time. Lily still comes every other weekend. She brings her sketchbook and fills page after page with our walks by the lake, our cornbread in the oven, the rocking chair on the porch. Each drawing finds a place on my study wall. Her presence is proof that some ties survive pruning. Last week, I received a wedding invitation from Daniel's cousin, a simple card with a handwritten note. It wouldn't be the same without you, Aunt Eleanor. I smiled, but I won't attend. That week, I'll be an Oregon camera in hand, chasing waterfalls I've never seen. They planned a future without me, so I created a life without them. And this life, quiet, free, but never empty, is exactly where I belong. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.